I'd like to first introduce the panel. I have Ilya Polyakov, from CEO and founder of Revolve Robotics, who has been in business for the past 5 years selling tabletop telepresence robots. Sharon Marzouk, founder and CEO of Techie Kids, an educational robotics startup and a very well-informed educator in the area of design thinking and education. And Alastair Trueger, founder of Creative Ventures. He is an early stage venture capitalist in robotics startups and would love to talk to you about your seed round or your Series A. So a little bit about myself. Yes, I've been in robotics for the past 10 years. I have my master's in mechanical engineering. I have an undergrad in industrial engineering. I very much made it my intent to work with robotic startups. And 7 years ago, I realized that there were a lot of robotic startups building robots that nobody wanted to buy. I very quickly became interested in the space of product management and marketing. And so what I do now is I consult with robotic startups and I help them write their market requirements doc. Now, the interesting angle on that is the past 8 years, I've been looking for markets on where to sell robots. It was actually also a conversation about labor, because a lot of industrial robots are augmenting labor force. And so the economics for your value proposition, your return on investment, and the value to the customer all shift when you're actually alternating the operations of a company. So that's some of the lens that I come from and some of the experience I've had in the past 8 years, and happy to share with you today. Ilya, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I've been in robotics for a little over 20 years, actually. I started out doing BattleBots on Comedy Central. I've done industrial automation in factories all over the world. And currently, I'm doing a startup doing consumer robotics, basically telepresence robots that are the MVP of telepresence robots, where they're just desktop pan and tilt stands for tablets. And it's been an interesting ride. We've been at it for 5 years. We've shipped a couple of thousand units already. Approached a couple of different markets and learned a lot about what people actually need from their robots. So.
And I'm the founder of TechieKids.com. And so my background is actually mechanical engineering, and I went into education because someone was looking for someone technical good with kids. And so I started teaching once a week after school program. I opened one of the first maker spaces about 7 years ago in the Bay Area. And the thing about being an engineer is you learn how to think. And so with robotics, I see a lot of power in being able to teach people how to think with something that's interactive, that's relevant, and that it's interdisciplinary. And so I've been a technology teacher for the last 4 years, and then I've been essentially wondering how to take teaching kids technology, robotics, and design thinking to scale. Because right now I'm just noticing a big gap between what's happening in industry and education, and so I've been working to solve that gap.
My name is Alastair Trueger, and as Erin kindly said, I'm one of the founders of Creative Ventures. My background is a little odd, half English, half American. I've done everything from sort of marketing and branding to operations on a gold mine in the Philippines, business development in India, investment out of the UK. And we started this fund, Creative Ventures, in the last year or so to go after the big problems. Labor productivity, the fact that there are not enough people to do a lot of the jobs we need. Climate change, the fact that we need more food to feed the world, and the food mix is changing, and obviously the aging population, the fact that everyone's getting older and we need better ways of taking care of them. And so our fund focuses on those things, and obviously robotics is a huge part of that. We need robots to address the challenges of the future.
Touching upon that, I'd like to ask the question, what are we most passionate about when it comes to robotics in terms of the possibility for robotics? So in my 8 years of investigating new markets for robotics startups, I see a fragmentation at the labor force, with the labor force at the tiers for the jobs that are really difficult to do. People go home tired, they go home with hurt backs, they go home with like repetitive stress injuries. And these jobs are high turnover. And not only does it put the labor at basically getting the work done at risk, it puts the company at risk. And a lot of companies are facing high turnover labor pools. And there's also issues in labor force in terms of mid-tier technical labor to help run machinery and equipment. I'm passionate about the possibility that robots can supplement this and help people have upward mobility in their work life to become tool operators, but I also feel responsible for the educational and retraining aspect that requires, in addition to building the robotic technology to supplement it. So that's what gets me passionate and excited about the future of robotics and what's possible. Ilya, what are you most passionate about?
Yeah, it's the user experience of robotics has really been interesting for me, and I think Apple ruined a lot of things for hardware designers, where now there's an expectation of a seamless, out of the box, just turn the thing on and go user experience, and that's being applied to robotics. I mean, we've had to deal with that quite a bit in the last 5 years, where people don't care that it's a robot. They need a thing to do a thing, and they don't want to think about it too much. So how do you automate it? How do you take the technology out of the equation and just have a good relationship between the machine and the human? And the human will always be there to some extent because the machines are doing the work for the humans. So yeah, that's been a very, very interesting one.
So for me, if you actually take robotics and technology, one of the effects has been that one person can do the work of 100 people now, right? With a computer or a robot, and things are changing. So what used to be maybe one person is doing the work for one person, what you're actually noticing is this: if you were to take and stretch it up, right, as a pyramid, the people at the top can now affect and make the income that many other people were making, and it used to be more evenly divided, and now it's, you know, a very different system. So I am passionate about my work in education because while this happens, you need to bring up the base. You need to bring up the education of the people going through the system and make sure that they're prepared for the future of what currently exists. Because with this, you end up with, you know, then we start talking about basic income and what do those people do? But if we can get education to those people, then they're always going to be relevant in the new world. But if we don't train those people, then we're just going to have to find ways to make them take up time. But I think that a big thing about humanity is people want to be useful. And so if we can give them the proper tools with education to have everyone be an active participator in our communities, I like that solution better than just making sure everyone has food. So I'm all for active participation in our world.
And the companies need thoughtful workers as well. This is like, people need the work, companies need the workers, the robots supplement the jobs that are backbreaking. There's a system in equilibrium I see as possible, but we also need to be responsible for making it happen.
Well, I would agree. It's the promise of robotics is what it has always been. A dishwasher is arguably a robot. A washing machine is arguably a robot. You know, all of these, you know, a vacuum cleaner is arguably a type of robot. All of these machines eliminate, reduce, mitigate drudgery. They allow one person to do more work than they were previously able to do. Now, what we have seen is that, surprisingly, you know, the introduction of the original washing machine, the introduction of the original dishwasher, these were not things that led to a decrease in jobs. Actually, they were responses to the fact that you couldn't find people to do these jobs. I see a lot of the quote-unquote debate about robotics to be a non-starter because it is something that fundamentally allows people to do the jobs that they should be doing, as opposed to scrubbing dishes or back-breaking labor digging holes. This is stuff. Why not have a robot do it?
I mean, there's like the notion of now we have the creative class, right? Like, do you think that there's going to be a resurgence in liberal arts and kind of elevation of the creative class? And because those people can do creative things because they don't have to deal with all the small stuff anymore. Is that a thing?
Like some things I've read is that craft and, as you said, like the creativity is going to take off. And I do think it's going to be a blend. Like Erin mentioned, people to help take care of those tools and be able to understand the hardware to accelerate that. I think there's going to be a need for real-world problem solving because now memorization becomes less needed, repetition becomes less needed, and so there is that creative problem-solving aspect. And then there's things like poetry and art. Now that brings on an interesting subject because right now we're seeing a lot of like, Prisma, that app, that at a second you can take an image and make it art. But what that's really doing is copying Van Gogh's style, right? So I do think that it'll be a different form of creative expression that ends up happening, and I think it'll be important, but at the same time, everything seems to be copyable, and so that rise is going to happen, and I think it's going to be important to blend the technology with the creativity in order to be successful.
So now we're kind of getting to the meat of the conversation here, and so we've all just mentioned what we're most passionate about, and what we're actually discussing. And the thing I want to touch upon next are the macroeconomic trends that are market creation for robotics startups. Now, a lot of robotics panels, we want to be the honest robotics panel. Let's just put it that way. There's a lot of things you read on the news that are not true, and keep in mind that's placed articles, and the word robot is excellent clickbait for a lot of journalists. If you're trying to build a company based off of what you read on the internet, it's not going to happen. We're here to debunk that. And also, we want your participation. If we say anything that sounds like jargon, raise your hand and call BS. Because what we have here, we've all been in the trenches. And Ilya has a story about this. Yeah. We've had people giving us great advice 5 or 8 years ago, and we ignored them. And then 5 or 8 years later, like, oh yeah, that was really great advice. So you want to build something the market wants. Oh. And the opportunity for the market scope. Put the technology aside, the technology is getting cheaper and better, that's consistent. When a piece of automation works for a customer, they will buy it. That is just a fact. Anywhere robotics is stagnating right now is because either technology doesn't function as well as it should, but it's getting there, and there's market creation in the terms of demographic change, labor shortage, labor shift. There's also a very functional problem that there's not enough mid-tier technicians to run this equipment. Warehouses are already finding it difficult to find enough low-voltage technicians to run their conveyor. So how am I going to install a robot at that warehouse if they can't even run a conveyor? And that's where the educational component comes in. So in terms of what we're passionate about the mix of robotics and technology, but it's really the macroeconomics driving the market creation in this space. And that's what I invite you to look at.
Ilya,
what trends have you seen in the past 5 years?
Oh, I have many stories.
And Ilya, what?
I mean,
what advice do you wish you took?
I mean, so the biggest thing that I came across, and that goes back to user experience. We sit here in Silicon Valley, and we're coming up with this technology. We're exposed to it. We live it. We're surrounded by self-driving cars that we take for granted. But just to give you an example of the chasm between our little bubble here and the rest of the world, we're selling our robots into education, so telepresence bring students into the classroom, and we're on a call. All the tech people in my company had to be on sales calls once in a while. We're on a sales call with somebody in Ohio, and this is a person in charge of IT for a school district, and she asked us, "Oh, so you need internet on both sides for this?" At which point I turned red. Yes, for video conferencing you need internet on both sides. And this was an honest question that was asked, and that just symbolized kind of this huge dichotomy, this divide between what we're building what we think people need and how people perceive what we're doing. They don't have the technical knowledge that we do by like orders of magnitude, not just by a little bit, but by orders of magnitude. And going back to like industrial automation and big factory automation, those are very specialized systems going into very specialized, very structured environments where you have to build the environment around the automation. And if automation is to spread to the general public or to the broader world, there's a huge chasm that we have to cross in terms of user experience, because I'm a restaurant owner and I lost my dishwasher because of immigration issues. I'm not going to go out and buy a $100,000 robot. Like, that's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So what happens? How does that? How do I make, as the business owner, how do I make the switch to go automation from a real world perspective, not from a hypothetical perspective that we have here over coffee?
And this is one of the things that a lot of robotics companies get wrong. They try to sell a product. I think it was you who told me this. The arms dealer model, where you here, have a robot.
Robot arm dealer.
Yeah.
Arms dealer.
Yeah.
Don't be an arms dealer.
Oh,
Yeah.
I get it.
Have a robot. Great. Don't forget to call. But if you're a factory owner, sorry, not factory owner, if you're a restaurant owner, if you're a hotel owner, if you're a paper mill or something like that, that's not what you need. You need a solution.
Right.
You need the robot is a part of the solution, but the robot is not what you are selling. What you are selling is, I am reducing your labor cost. I am reducing the cost of this particular paper operation by this %, which will affect your bottom line in this way. That's what they are buying. They don't give a shit if it's a robot or if it's advanced cat stroking machine.
I could make your problems go away. That's what they want.
Yeah.
And I think there's this major disconnect that's happening. You were talking about people to work on these machines. It's interesting in our society how it's like, okay, we value blue collar, now we value white collar. And there's always this like focus, like everyone needs to code. But the way that there is this inequality in how we view roles is a little bit mind-bending. At first I wanted to do art in college, and then I ended up doing engineering because my mom said, get a degree you can use. And so I did engineering, and so I ended up with my engineering degree, and people would walk up to me, oh, you did engineering, so you're smart. And I'm like, well, that was a path that I chose, but just because I did engineering, I'm smart. If I had chosen the other path, I wouldn't be smart.
Definitely not. History majors are dumb.
So it just didn't make sense to me. And the problem also is we have this system where they focus on we don't want to get sued, we don't want to be liable. So they took out all these shop classes in schools, and that's the art of hands-on, crafting, making, but what did they replace it with? And so we end up with a bunch of people who say, oh, I don't want to get my hands dirty. It doesn't, I'm above that. Mm-hmm. But these kind of, notions aren't very good for our society, and I feel like it's adding to what happens in current politics today. And so I think what you're talking about is bringing a solution, and it comes with design that is full circle, as opposed to we're going to put a bunch of parts together and here is the perfect robot. People always forget, no, you have to make sure there's a business. You have to make sure people are trained on it. You need an entire community in order to make anything successful. And so just focusing on that.
And I would like to speak to some of the trade-offs, though. There are functional trade-offs when you're building robot arms. Do you have a question?
Yes, to you. So I was looking, you mentioned you work with educating kids and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of any empirical studies that compare robots to versus human beings? A good teacher, for instance, right? That says a robot significantly justifies and improves the learning curve, and that's why we should. I can imagine, but I'm not aware of a study that really sparks that.
So the question is there a study that shows that robotics education is more effective?
I believe that there's lots of them. And even if you use your intuition, so for instance, like this is an educational robot, okay? And the deal with an educational robot is, for instance, okay, I'm gonna put my hands in front, right? You see a response happening, so then you can ask, why is that happening, right? So if people have senses and robots have sensors, this is most similar to your eyes, where it can see my hand in front of it and it can respond, okay? And then if I put it down and the robot moves, why? So if you think about humans and how many sensors we have and how we take in information, then the more senses that you engage with, the more you can relate to it.
That you are looking at a static knowledge source, right? You have sensors as an embedded system in a device, but they react only to that what you have already defined, right? Looking at the categories what's available today in all sort of robots, especially in the education area, I was a little bit disappointed to bring those kids things in front of. So my background is also, our company has nothing to do with educational software and robots or so. We are in the robotics area, and I, for instance, bought Cosmo and to play around, and it's good for me. My kids are, so it's good to play around to see the interfaces. But if it comes to the really teaching value, it's something else than advertised.
So I exactly know what you're talking about, and
that's why we're here, I think.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Because what we were talking about before we came in here is the fact that robotics are cheap right now, right? And so people can throw together a bunch of parts and call it an educational robot, but they're missing the part of the curriculum and the courseware, okay? And all of the thinking behind it, which is what I do, because I've noticed that and it irritates me, right? Because anyone will sell you the dream. Buy this piece of hardware and you'll become a roboticist, right? And everyone is selling you the dream without the research behind it, without the training behind it, without the real world testing that needs to be done in order to really have that, okay? And so it's a lot easier to put together a bunch of parts, call it an educational robot, and
Super
say,
easy now.
it's super
Instant.
easy,
Yep.
right? But for instance, like this robot has been developed out of a university as an educational robot, and I've been teaching with it in my classroom for more than 4 years now, and developed curriculum and courseware with it, with real world doing, right?
And this goes across a larger trend. The robot is such a small portion of the value you bring. It is minuscule.
Exactly.
Yep.
You know, like what annoys you, what annoys me, what annoys you. There's a lot of things about robotics that we each individually have personal grievances with, and yet we keep doing it because we're like, oh, we can poke through that.
Because there's a human bias of like, I bought a thing. This is a thing. It is a physical thing. I have this thing now, and this thing is gonna like do all the things that I want it to do. But the thing you don't see is that's just the point of the spear. There's the software. There's the market research. There's the
business
product
development
design,
relationships.
the business there's
The channel.
the
Sales
hardware is
cycle.
not the essence, and I think it's just the natural human bias of like the physical thing is the thing, whereas with robotics it's mostly in software. It really is.
And the fun thing about robotics is you're not only evoking your own internal operations, and if you're doing automation, your internal operations should look somewhat like a staffing agency, but your customer is also changing their operations.
Yep.
And getting there, if you have a customer who's been doing things a certain way for 20 years and you're asking them to change their operations drastically, there's going to be backlash on that. So I want to touch upon kind of the trend in robotics that everyone has seen industrial robots on the auto manufacturing line for the past 30 years. Why don't you see them elsewhere? And here's the challenge, and here's the scope that technology brings that combines basically computer vision with usability. So have people here heard about the collaborative robotics space, like Universal Robots, Baxter, all those? So they are trying to address the market in a way where they want to make robotic arms easier to program. Now, this touches upon the educational aspect as well. You can be, and this is some of the automation work you did like some years ago. Robots in the past, you need a lot of experience and a lot of technical background in order to program them to do a car line. That's very expensive. So the value proposition of that makes sense when it's building the same car for 5 or 10 years and your changeover isn't that routine. The competitive advantage the collaborative robotics people are making, and I'm just using this as an example because it translates across all of robotics and why I view us as being a little bit stuck, is they're trying to bring robotic arms to places that have higher changeover. So if you're a CM, a contract manufacturer, doing a changeover once every like 3 or 6 months, the ROI of an industrial robot doesn't make sense because it takes too long to set up. You want something that sets up faster and cheaper, hence a collaborative robot, ship light on a pallet. But you still need some programming skill or at least some design thinking in order to program a collaborative robot. And that labor pool still needs more skill set and just design thinking, not necessarily programming. So the competitive advantage for robotics is being able to do a higher variability of tasks with reduced time and changeover. Collaborative robotics is a middle ground for that right now. Ultimately, what we want to do is have the machine learning and computer vision and AI work in a sense where you can put a robot in front of a thing, press a button, and it just works. That's a dream that isn't there yet. But here we're seeing different components to the stack of need some technical competency in order to work with the tool to help it with an increased variable task.
But I would actually disagree. I think that is there. It just requires having people in the mix. It entails having a process. It entails cherry picking your materials. It goes back to that whole sell a solution. Don't sell just the robot, because yeah, sure, your costs are going to be a little bit higher if you're using a person. You're going to have more of a challenge building the product out, but yeah, I think it can be there.
Well, I mean, classically in industrial automation, that was either a third-party integrator house, which is where I worked, or if it's an in-house automation department, they still had their application engineers, integrators that took all of these pieces that are out in the automation market and put them together into a solution. But that was a really, really tough job. And going back to what you were talking about, changeover, one of the reasons I left automation in the first place is because when a lot of classic, kind of human factories decide to go with automation, so what does that process look like? And this is like this battery factory we did a job for is a perfect example. Gulf War happened. We need batteries for the military. We can't fill demand. We need to automate this. By the time management makes a decision to invest in automation, they're already behind on their production. You need a very short turnaround on a very custom system. These are very custom systems to integrate, 6 to 8 months. By the time you're there, there's just huge pressure to get it done. It's 20-hour days. It's weeks to set it up. Very, very high pressure. I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. But there is that huge time delay of automating a task that I don't think we're still there on.
I'm saying this is why you're not seeing robots out in the real world or in high changeover facilities so much. And the opportunity for new markets, we want to look at that and look at the technical reach in order to achieve that. So question along those lines. What new technologies are you most excited about?
Can we view what new technology we're most pessimistic about?
Sure.
Do it.
Oh, now I'm on the spot.
We are wearing the hat with a light bulb on your head.
Yeah, I mean.
But it's not lit up. I mean, you know, if it was lit up, you'd expect me to have a clue. I don't have a clue.
It's dead, yes.
Yeah. New technology I'm most pessimistic about. Generally, there's an inverse relationship between the thing that people are talking the most about and what is actually going to be useful. I think, screw it, I'm pessimistic about AI. I think that everybody assumes it's going to solve all the problems. Everybody assumes you're going to get very, very high levels of accuracy. Everyone assumes you're going to, oh yes, you know, blah, blah, blah. And what I've seen is that the companies that are doing interesting things with AI are going in assuming they're not going to get very, very high levels of accuracy. They're assuming they're going to get 80%. They're assuming they're going to get maybe 90%. They're not assuming 99%. They're not assuming 100%. They're not going after applications that require you to get it right all the time. I'm very skeptical of anybody who thinks that these technologies are going to be at the level of quality required in the near future.
And that's why I think there's always going to be a person in the loop, where
Yep.
you need the combination of a smart enough tool for easy changeover by an informed worker, but you don't need some crazy ass awesome programmer like Ilya over here.
Well, the other thing,
but someone that can be changed over by an average person with good usability.
I mean, the other thing that kind of always bothered me about robotics is that because it's technology and because it's artificial intelligence, we expect it to be 100% right. That's the goal we set for it. Like when we're doing industrial automation, well, the machine has to go without failure for 2,000 parts. Why? Can your humans do that? Like, no. So no, it doesn't have to be 100% efficient. It could be like 95% efficient, 90% efficient. That's still better than people, but there is this artificially set like high level of expectation we have for technology that it's not allowed to screw up.
Well, it's bullshit.
It can't screw up.
I'd like to bring on the point too that it's important to remember that any tool that can be used for good can also be used for bad. And so you can use a tool the right way and get amazing results. You can use that tool the wrong way and get pretty much the opposite result. And so the same technologies that I'm optimistic about, I'm pessimistic about. And the thing about technology is it has an amazing reach and scale quickly. And so what I think is crucial in all of this is to teach mindset, because with technology, it helps you create a lot faster and impact a lot more, but you can use that same technology in the bad way. And so I think teaching mindset and that collaboration mindset is extremely important because, right, you can take 1,000 people to help build a building. It could take one person to destroy that building. And so I think it's very important with this rise of technology to make sure that we instill that mindset that we all need to be working together collaboratively, that all of these different skill sets are important. And I think robotics is interesting because it's this interdisciplinary thing that as an object, it represents everybody. Whether it's the form and the art and the functionality or the engineering, the hardware, the software that goes in and the purpose behind this robot and how you communicate it out. And so that's what interests me when it comes to being able to teach with robotics, because you can teach all of this with one platform, and it's a platform that people can relate to in different forms, and robots are based off of humans. And we're able to relate off something that is relatable, right? And so I think robotics makes it an interesting way by that way. And so I'm optimistic because I'm not in love with robots. But the reason why I do what I do is because I've seen the way that kids and humans of all ages can connect with robots, right? Because it's interactive, it gives feedback, and you can program it, build it, make it, create it, and you can do all sorts of stuff. And so that's why I'm optimistic about robotics. but the same aspect of you can use something for good or you could use it for bad, that's what also scares me a bit, right? But I think that's why you have to also put in that collaborative mindset in there, where we all work together, we're in this together, and we're trying to have a purpose here used for good.
And the collaborative mindset applies even to the people who are nominally your enemy. If you're replacing, say somebody doing riveting, or you're replacing a person who is, washing a dish or something, that's what your robot is doing. You should be talking to those people. You should be engaging with them, because chances are, they see the writing on the wall the same way you do, and there can be really, really interesting opportunities to collaborate with those people. I think, for instance, one of the really interesting areas that robotics companies have not yet really, grappled with is organized labor. I think actually robotics fits very, very well with organized labor and with the goals of a lot of the organized labor unions. And having these conversations early can really help enhance the strength of a company and can actually be a competitive advantage.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're the one who has a good reputation of playing well with labor, then it's a lot harder for someone else to come in and sell into these unionized factories.
Well,
Actually,
so about the unionized factory, it's funny, I do have a story about that. And I think a lot of it goes to the management of these factories and the education. So, perfect story, I was working in a factory. We were installing a system, a battery assembly, battery welding system up in Vancouver. And this system was replacing 16 people. There were 16 fixture stations, and the people were sitting right there. And the management had us set up the station right next to where they were working, which is like awesome. So they were basically deer in headlights the whole time we were setting it up, because at some point they realized this is the thing that's going to take our jobs. Like, we're right there. I had people come up to me, the more passive people were like, oh, where am I going to sit here? I'm like, well, you don't.
So,
and that shouldn't have fallen on us. Like that we had to go, talk to your management. They like, no, it's not going to replace your job. You're just going to go somewhere else. But the more feisty people, we had threats. This was a Canadian Auto Workers Union shop, and
I'd like to, can I touch on that as well?
Yeah.
okay, I got 30 seconds because I'm going to shift.
Okay, so I had exposure to both. I interviewed at a steel company that was unionized, and I used to work at Toyota. And the mentality of like, oh my gosh, they let you touch things here as an engineer. And when I went in and I would create technological solutions to solve problems on the floor, and I would ask and go through the design process of like, well, what would make it easier? What would make it better? So by the end, you have a bunch of people who are like, yes, I'm empowered with this tool. And then there's the other way of, oh my gosh, you're about to take away my job. And a lot of that is the approach that, and
it's how you introduce it.
it's how you introduce it.
It's how you frame it.
Yeah, and so the collaborative robotics companies like Rethink and Universal are introducing those conversations and training their customers on it's a partner alongside the worker. They actually have the workers set them up, and this is how they work around that. So I just want to kind of so the points we're driving home before I go to the next point. First point: macroeconomic trends in labor shift. That's going to be some market creation. Those are things to be excited about. What we hammered home right here is we're skeptical the AI is ever going to work fully. So the robots are going to be alongside people. They're going to be tools alongside people. Think with that lens. Also think with the lens that your business, the customer just wants the work done. They don't care if a robot is in your black box. You're showing up with a black box of operations, people, tools, maybe robots. The customer just wants to buy the thing that you're doing for them. They don't really care if a robot's in the mix, but the robot is your competitive advantage, but it isn't the only portion of your competitive advantage. So that was point 2, the robots are working alongside people. Macroeconomics, creating labor, robots working alongside people, thinking of the tools. And this is a conversation about robots that impact labor. I know there's a lot of people building drones and a lot of consumer robotics. My lens on those are, there's already a lot of people building drones, and consumer robots, unless it's cheap and it's a toy, it's a toy. But I care about the impact of robots that actually do work. Third point, what does it take? So let's say you have the great idea, you have the market, you're viewing your robot as a tool, you have technology that makes changeover and doing higher variability tasks like economically viable for your business. That's awesome. Lessons learned and ways to set up your business.
Ooh, Ilya.
Ooh. Yeah, so
We got 10 minutes, so.
All right, this might take like 40. So don't
get
kick
down to
off production in China. Keep everything in-house.
Yes.
Do your design in-house. I think you need as much vertical integration in your design as possible.
Yep.
Because there are so many factors. There's code, there's design, there's hardware, there's mechanical, there's electrical. Keep it all close to yourself. You have
And feel free to tell the VCs that they're being idiots when they want you to outsource this and shift that to China and do this thing in Uzbekistan.
Right.
Like, VCs actually generally respond quite well to being told that they're idiots. But
You
continue.
can practice on Alastair later.
See the light bulbs on.
But yeah, I think it takes a lot longer to figure out your task, your application, than to just kickstart the thing, go to China, produce 5,000 units, and then boom, it's out on the market, and you just created a lot of plastic scrap, and we've seen a lot of that. We've seen a lot of plastic scrap created in the last 5 years.
I mean, as he's talking about, like, I think it's reflective of our economy, which is this throwaway economy. You'd rather buy something cheap, have it in your hands now, than you're not thinking of the long-term effects, the long-term costs, how it, and so I just think that's fairly interesting because these different themes tie in together, right? A lot of these themes tie in together.
Right. Yeah, and going back to vertical integration, if you think you need to outsource parts of your business like design, maybe core software architecture, we're just going to contract this firm. Step back, don't do it.
Yeah.
Reevaluate getting into robotics, because there are a lot of moving pieces. Even with what we're doing with 2 moving motors, it's 2 servo motors holding up a tablet that you control over the web. There are so many parts of that chain where the hardware is just, that's the last thing you have to worry about. There's web ops, there's mobile apps, there's Bluetooth connectivity. There's just so much stuff going on that you need to have people and expertise, at least to manage the outside contractors that you have to have in-house. There's a lot more moving pieces there. And design and user experience are a core part of that.
And it's never too early to start talking to customers.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, you should talk to customers before you do anything, because the customer might say, actually, I really don't care about this thing. I care about that thing.
Right.
Awesome hack when it comes to talking to customers, especially if you're doing competitive research. The customer will love to tell you everything they hate about someone else's product.
Yes, that is so true.
So enjoy that piece.
Yeah.
Like, so you bought this, what don't you like about it? Oh, and then you're like, okay, so if I put that in my product spec, I have a competitive advantage. Good to know. And all it took was a conversation.
And a lot of the time, if you just tell the customer, hey, I'm building this thing. This is who I am. I'm interesting. I know things about robots and stuff. I'm building this thing. What would it take for this thing to be interesting to you? What would it take for you to roll this out in your first factory, in your second, in 50 factories? What's the process for that? They will tell you everything you need to know to build the product that serves them, because their biggest bugbear is when they have to buy products that don't actually solve their problems. And a lot of the time that happens in really, really big companies. The mandate comes down from above. Automate, robot, CRM, random software as a service thing. So the customer wants to help you build the product for them. So take ruthless advantage of that.
Totally.
So what was something, in terms of setting up a business, as a technical founder, what were things that you wish you knew before? And Alastair, what are things that people did to set up their businesses that you like to see as an investor, and things that just absolutely need to be in place? I'm speaking from the lens, like, if you're somebody straight out of college wants to start your robotics company, what would you want to tell that person that they should go seek some help with?
Good luck.
Tell them getting them anything across.
Hardware is going to be a lot. The hardware part of it is going to be a lot more expensive than you think.
It's going to take more time.
It's going to take time. It's not instant, although it's really fast. I mean, it's an order of magnitude faster now than it was 10 years ago, which is awesome. But that's also really expensive. Hardware is going to be more expensive, and software for a hardware robotics person coming in, software and user experience is a much more open-ended question than you think. So early on, work very hard to constrain the problem, focus on simplicity, and really understand what the minimum viable product for your application is. Don't build a robot for the sake of building a cool robot. Don't build a solution for the sake of building a solution. Really understand the problem you're trying to solve and minimize the number of features, because every feature you put into the product, let's say I want to have a cool blinking LED, well, that blinking LED has a whole exponential amount of things that you have to deal with later on. You have to do quality control, you have to source it, you have a supply chain. There's this whole, the feature is just the tip of the iceberg of what comes behind that feature. So early on, every single decision you make can make or break you, and it could come down to an LED. Like I've had products held back because a super custom one-off inductor design was stuck in a factory, in a TDK factory in Japan, and nobody else had it, and it was flooded because of a tsunami.
I think I'll put on
Because that just happens.
I'll put on my teacher hat, and I will say that don't do it because you think it'll be easy and because it won't be easy. There's, as someone said, no such thing as an overnight success. There's years of work to get there, and then maybe it'll tip. So realize you should do something, because when you engage in it, you're not only engaging in the work, you're engaging with the people involved as well. So it's important to remember that you're going to need persistence, right? You're going to need to keep banging your head against the wall, and hopefully it'll start producing results, or move that wall to get you somewhere.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. I mean, right?
There's persistence and there's beating a dead horse.
Yeah, and it's hard to know.
And in startup,
when.
yeah, you don't know. That's
right?
the thing. That's the fun thing about startups. You never know.
You don't know if it's persistence or beating a dead horse?
Yeah, no, you don't.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's why there's such a high rate of failure, right? I mean, because someone might make it look easy, but think of how many companies aren't surviving.
I mean, you're supposed to make it look easy.
You're supposed to make it look easy.
Everybody's a duck on the surface. They're all
frantically
look at me, I'm a
paddling.
duck. But under the water, they're paddling for their lives, and that's pretty standard around here.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember that with technology, it makes it easy to assemble and get a working prototype up front, but to push it to market and have it successful, produce it, and everything is a whole nother ball game.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things on the market now, right? You can 3D print something like that, but it takes a whole
to some extent, this whole panel, I'll make the argument that if we knew all the things we know now when we got out of college and started doing, getting entrepreneurial, we probably wouldn't do them. So I work with a lot of other startups, and I try to advise them. And you don't want to unload all this stuff all at once, because it is daunting. I mean, there's a reason why Kickstarter projects are always late, because the people that get into it are inherently optimistic. If they weren't, blindly, delusionally optimistic, you wouldn't be doing it in the first place. Mm-hmm. So to some extent, ignorance is bliss, as long as you can, go with the flow and kind of move with the punches. I think that's.
We only have 1 minute, so Alastair,
that's what works.
chiming in on this.
Elephant in the room is money. Robots need money. Hardware needs money. It's a really, really big problem. And raising money is really hard. I think one of the biggest things that I see is people not thinking far enough ahead about how much money they're going to need to be successful if things go well, if things go badly, and not creating a situation where, irrespective of if the product is delayed, irrespective of how things go, whatever, they're still going to be okay. Too many people just try to get from point to point to point, just barely scraping along, and they don't take the long view. And you cannot afford to do that with a product that has fixed costs and a fixed, thing that has to be delivered. You can just about get away with it in SaaS, but you can't do it in hardware.
Yeah.
And if I leave you with anything, it's think about fundraising, think about how much money you're going to take, and think about how you can minimize that. Think about how, if the entire market turns against robots and nobody wants to give you $1, you can stay alive for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Because those are the companies that are going to be successful.
And to close, closing thought number 1, closing thought number 2, love your market more than your robot.
Yeah.
Love your customers, love the problem you're solving, because there's a company that we're friends with who actually decided recently that they looked at a market problem. Their initial hypothesis was like a robot could help with this. And then they realized, like, actually, we can solve the problem with an app, and then we don't have to deal with all this manufacturing. Isn't that convenient? That's better for my
MVP.
business. And there's some drone companies too who are just like, I'm just gonna make the software. So this is Hardware Con, and hardware is great, but also in anything that you build and anything that you sell, love your customer and your market more than the thing it is you're selling. And making sure their problem, love that more, it's more important for you to solve their problem than for it is you to build something. So I think
unless you want to build stuff, then you could do it in your garage.
You can build stuff in your garage.
That's fun. That's great.
Yeah.
That's good too. I do that as well. But that's not making a business. That's not making a product. That's not solving problems.
Love your customer, love your market, love the problem that you're solving, and good design is whatever it takes to solve that problem.
Right.
Talk to people who've done it before and ask them what they wish they'd known.
Or just talk to us afterwards.
I'd say don't. You don't want to know. You don't want to know what's in here.
And if you want to tell a VC he's wrong, Alastair's right here. So, all right, thank you.
Cheers.